Right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. So this is a panel discussion. It's a chat that you're going to be listening to us chatting, really. And I think that's the best way to do these things. And what we're going to be chatting about is designing offices, basically. You've seen the full title. It's about experience, performance, ambition, environment and reality. But really, what we're going to be talking about is how all of these things come together, how it works in reality, what the pinch points are, what the frictions are, what the complements are between these things. And as a panel, we've got hopefully all the bases that we need to have covered. So I'm joined by Roxana. Roxana is a senior lighting designer at Cundall. We've got Victor. Victor's principal acoustics consultant at Cundall. We've got Georgina, who's UK real estate and workplace director at JLL. And we've got James Geekie, group design director at Area. And I'm Andy Parkin. I'm a partner at Cundall. So we talk about offices all the time. I mean, Clerkenwell, everywhere you go, we talk about offices. Have we now got to the point where we're stopping talking about post-COVID offices? I think surely we're in business as usual now. People are back in the office. Certainly all the people that are going to get back in the office are back in the office. But I think what we're now seeing and appreciating more of is that the office is inhabited by a wide variety of people. We've got people with different personality types. We've got people with varying neurodiversities. We've got people who span up to 5 generational cohorts all in one office. And within that as well, we've got people having different roles and different tasks. So we're asking quite a lot of our offices to cater for all of these things. There's so many variables in place. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And what we're going to be talking about is how we get things right. And the only way of getting things right really is by doing stuff together. So I'm going to be posing a number of questions and then just asking the panelists to chip in and help us on that discussion. And I guess that the first question is really, obviously when we're designing an office, it's not just for now. It's for now and maybe the next 10 years with a 5-year break or whatever your lease agreement is. And so how do we future-proof an office? If we've accepted that we've gone beyond COVID, we've learned all that has got to teach us, how do we future-proof an office? And I guess probably start with James as a designer. How do we build these things in so that they're good in continuity rather than just on day one?
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Andy. Good question. Afternoon, everybody. I think future-proofing offices, I think has been a term that's probably been around for some time for various reasons. But I think right now at the moment, I think it's very difficult to predict the future of a workspace and really what the demands and what the needs are going to be. I mean, advances in technology is so rapid and changing, it feels like monthly, let alone 6 monthly. So if you're in the process of taking a lease for 5 or 10 years at the moment, I think certainly designing in a level of adaptability and allowing a workspace to evolve over that lease period, I think is just good practice. And again, that's something we talk to lots of our clients about. I think a lot of it has got to be data driven as well. There was I had a conversation with Enrique, who's here in the audience, about do you build a brief based on a vibe, or do you build a brief based on fact and then feeling with the kind of the right audience. So, but I also think the engagement with the right people at the right time, and I would say that engagement has to be as early as possible in visioning sessions, in really setting out what are the ambitions of that business, and then I think that the newer developments, I think the level of infrastructure that's also put in those buildings, I think has to be probably more now than it ever has done in the past to allow, advances in technology and infinitely the demands on power, data, infrastructure that comes into those businesses probably needs to be as well catered as it probably ever has done. And we talk about adaptability and allowing a workspace to evolve, but it can't all be lightweight facilities. There's got to, spaces have still got to have an element of gravitas as you kind of come into these spaces. So I think it's a tricky balance on, yes, we know that workspaces need to evolve and they need to adapt over that time. How much, I think, is actually quite difficult to predict.
So I guess question to you then, Georgina, is with that in mind, as an occupier, as an end user, how do you portray what your emerging needs are to your designers, and how do you know what your needs are?
Yes, so for us, we're actually fitting out 90,000 square foot. We've got a 15-year lease, and that's a project that we've been in the middle of for a couple of years now. And I think what you were talking about, that early upfront piece, using the data that you do have, but our business is changing. Our business has changed throughout those sort of 3+ years of design. And sort of you have sort of different leadership changes, sort of different areas of the business expanding. So a lot of that is still data-led. So where we can use sensor data, attendance data, going back to your COVID point, to continue feeding into that. But in terms of upfront design, those principles of flexibility have allowed us to tweak along the way. And that could be sort of changing furniture settings, but ultimately the infrastructure that you've put in place in the office is there to flex with changing out space types. It's kind of manifested in sort of challenging how many built spaces we put in versus sort of more of a sort of modular furniture plus style solution that we could then flex and change as the business changes throughout. So there's a few sort of ways that over the years with the design team we've worked through that. But I do think sort of the fundamental principles that you agree up front, if you've done that piece right, should stand throughout the course of time. So whether that is, particularly sort of health and well-being in the workplace, to me, that's standard, that's bread and butter, that's not going to change. You need to ensure that for your people, regardless of what the business is doing and how the business is changing. So there's a couple of sort of core principles there, but definitely with that flexibility in the back of your mind of how you're zoning up the space, how you could flex it in future, because whether that change happens during the design period or whether that change happens 5 years into occupation, that change is going to happen, and that is the certain that you're working.
I was going to say, so 90,000 square foot doesn't just happen overnight. There's a long period in the gestation of that. If you were to look back on your original design brief to your designers now, would you recognise it, or has it changed?
I would recognise it, yes. I think what has changed over the course of time has been sort of the level of ambition versus what we've actually sort of landed on and what we've been able to achieve. And I think it's always great to start a project ambitious. This is what we want to do. These are our priorities. Start really strong. And then the reality of the world we're living in, the economic climate, changes in the business, whatever it may be, where you land can look a bit different. But again, I'd go back to the fundamental principles are still recognisable in terms of experience, sort of well-being, inclusive design as a core principle of part of our experience piece that we worked on. And in terms of sustainability, it was much more around the carbon and the materials that we were putting into the space, and also in operation challenging the carbon that we'd be using. So yes, it's ebb and flowed, and some of the sort of really high level ambitions we had day one, we sort of had to scale back and sort of land at a slightly different point. But the fundamentals, I'd say, are still there and recognisable.
And so I guess from a design perspective then, moving this into sort of the physical design, when it comes to interpreting that brief, Victor, as you were working on that same project, how are you building in flexibility in the acoustic design of that building?
Well, that's a good question. It's true that you need this flexibility because you need to adapt to all these changes that Georgina was saying. So I guess one thing that you can do is not doing a design that is very static, but it's static in a way of the acoustic panels or things that you put there that absorbs the sound and make it good. But whatever you move in that room, partitions later on, or this room, I move it here or move it there, but the static acoustics that is there make it possible. Whatever you put here or there still is good acoustics. So you have to think about in that general perspective. Something that can be an open plan space for everybody can become later on some meeting rooms. So the solutions you think of need to adapt to that reality that later on might change.
So it's flexibility without rigidity, I guess.
Sort of, yeah.
And there's one of the things that's happening as part of that project is a lot of meeting pods are being taken from one of the other sites and put in there. And so I think there's one whole floor which is pretty much all meeting pods, isn't it? Which is...
Yeah, that was actually a good idea because it was a massive open plan area, and then we decided to put these panels in a way that then you have a lot of pods of different sizes, and you can move them around and give a completely different vibe later on in the future with the same products. You don't need to spend much more money buying all the stuff, and you change completely the vibe of the space.
And I guess you can do that over a weekend because these things are on casters and you just push them around.
Yeah.
So with Victor pushing his pods around and making flexibility, how do you like that without just flooding everything with 500 lux?
We always have a kind of challenge of when we design the open plan office, when it comes to Cat A, for example. They always want us to provide 500 lux, a blanket of light everywhere, which we know that it's not necessary, it's not very economical, and it will change. So when it comes to flexibility, for example, we think about two sides of it, physical flexibility and control, data control. So when you design a space, if you have control of change it later throughout the time, you have that chance to, turn that blanket of light to different vibes, to different moods, and use it. But if you don't provide that base, later on, you have to rip up everything, change everything, and it's not cost effective, and it's too much hassle.
So you're saying put the lights in everywhere, but then control them. So the flexibility is in the control rather than in the placement of the lights.
Yes, well, if you have to put it in first place in the Cat A, if that's a design brief from the client, that's a request, then the only way to mitigate the risk is to do that. But I personally don't agree with Cat A design, and I think most of the people in the industry don't like it either. But sometimes you have to
carry on churning them out. So let's touch on that point then. Provocative statement: Cat A is immoral and unsustainable. James,
Agree.
Do you agree?
Totally.
Cool. Okay. Georgina,
Semi-agree. I'm going to,
caveats.
Yes, there's circumstances.
Give us your caveats.
Yeah.
So
I think for me, it depends how easy it is to reuse what has been put in. And I've seen great Cat A where it's either very module, it's very easy to work with. If I think to some of our regional offices, we've been able to reuse what was put in day one, and it's been able to work within our design as an occupier very easily, versus some of the sites I visited where it is a very fixed structure that we would look at as an occupier thinking, oh God, we're going to have to rip all of this out, and carbon-wise, that's the last thing we want to do. So I think Cat A with reuse in mind, I'm open to.
And then sometimes there can also be this conflict of there's a moral standing to go, well, we really should use what's there, but are you compromising the end product and the end solution, and creatively by doing that, potentially? And I think there's this balance of being efficient with what you've got and doing the right thing, which is, okay, well, we really should utilise this, and do you design around services that are already put in. Would that be absolutely optimal? I guess there's a debate about that, isn't there?
The tail ends up wagging the dog, doesn't it?
It is.
And I guess a question then for you, Georgina, is have you ever been to look at a building where you thought, on paper, this seems really great, I'm really looking forward to seeing this. You walk in, you think, no, it's not us, and walk away?
I don't think it's ever been enough to fully walk away, but it's definitely a consideration. And as soon as you get into sort of your CapEx planning, that is the M&E costs are huge on a project.
Absolutely.
It's not a small item to just dismiss. So I think if you were sort of comparing two sites against each other financially, it could be enough to say, actually, it's not worth it.
So looking at the options available, you've got full Cat A, you've got shell and core, shell and floor. Where's the sweet spot in all of that?
I personally like shell and floor. I think Georgina mentioned it is subject to the building. If the building is old stock that's had a light refurb, it's difficult to make that feel appealing to an end user. But I think for a newish development or a development that's had heavy refurbishment go within there, I think a brand new shiny raised floor and an exposed soffit that could be sprayed potentially, and then a contribution rent-free period from the landlord. Chances are the landlord will always want to use their consultants and their incumbent contractors because that's how they protect their investment of their building. I understand that, but I think that's a really good sweet spot in the middle because you don't compromise at either end. That would be my preference, I think. And unless you're earlier, and again, this comes to this point that we mentioned earlier about being really early on in your process, unless you're early on enough with negotiations that you can influence the Cat A, that's probably the best sweet spot.
You've got to be an anchor tenant to do that, really, haven't you?
You've got to be in there really early, and that's early commitment, early conversations, which is rare out there. So I think for me, probably shell and floor is the right way to go.
Yeah. My only caveat on that would be size of office. So I think for me, if it's anything lower than 20,000, that feels then quite a big lift on the sort of
meters or feet?
Project. Feet, sorry. Whereas as soon as I'm going over sort of 25,000, I'd argue then the shell and floor is a sort of sweet spot for those larger ones.
And I think there's also other ways to, if it's a new building, there's other ways to show clients what those spaces could look like, whether that be digitally through virtual reality, whether that be physically. You might say, actually, I'm going to put a service provider in that part of that building or a Cat A plus to show what that space could look like, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you then Cat A the whole rest of the building. I think that's also a challenge is, having an end user that can see through what it could be. But there's some great digital tools that help with that.
I guess sometimes we maybe assume that our clients are more informed than they really are. Because
That's true.
A client like JLL, they are informed
Of
because
course.
they're in the real estate business. But you've got, I don't know, say a hedge fund moving into somewhere. They're not in the building game. So they're very much reliant on what we're doing for them. So just sort of talking about design and picking up on something that you said earlier, James, about sort of a vibe versus a spec. How do we interpret a client's desires and requirements and get the emotional response from the office that they want, but translate that into technical terms? Is that something that you want to talk
This
about?
for James.
So
I'm going to continue with that.
Yeah.
We talk a lot in our studios about, for want of a better word, a sense of feeling. When you go into a workspace, it's wonderful to see, you get a glimpse of a business's culture. I know that's a very overused term at the moment, but you get a glimpse of that business at work. You get a sense of a business on a purpose. There's a sense of activity. I even think it's down to the first person that you meet that's behind a desk, in a reception space, whatever that may be. I think there is a real pull for hospitality level of design and ethos now that's been brought into workspace. So, for instance, your front of house staff, why would you not have them trained by the same people that train some of the best hotel spaces that are out there? For instance, I think there is also a sensory part of walking into a space for the first time. Yes, it has visual impact, and I love, we talk in the studio lots about, a sense of awe, and do you walk into a space and does it make you smile? Now that can be because the whole space is amazing, that can be a controversial piece of artwork. As a designer, that can be a particular detail that I know somebody has crafted over that. But does it make you smile? Is there a sense of joy as you kind of walk into that space? And then I think, leading on from that, there is, the integrate and the experience that you have with that workspace. We've already talked about the people that you meet, but how easy is it to use? Does the tech just work first time, every time? It's not a thing. We've all been in those rooms where Teams doesn't work, the cable doesn't work, haven't got the right laptop, etc. That shouldn't be a thing. Technology should be almost more as iterative as an analog process is, and I think there are some companies that do that really well. But I think the experience in that workplace is also a big thing that we talk about. And to be fair, Andy, that all goes hand in hand with that sense of feeling and emotion and performance. It's got to tick all those boxes for it to really be a great, memorable workspace experience.
So, Georgina, as an end user then, when you're commissioning a design team to interpret your needs and wants, how do you make sure that you can crystallise that in terms of a brief, which is objective and subjective?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time, given the size of the project, the length of time we had to design, really pulling together sort of a technical sort of scoping sort of document for all our parties to respond to. And at the time, the technicality of that was really around sustainability, particularly in terms of embodied carbon and then operational carbon, and sort of challenging sort of our partners, what could they bring that was new and different to the project. And then we sort of really found throughout that interview process, you saw the different ways of thinking, those that were sort of further ahead in their sort of development ideas in terms of sustainability. So I'd say for JLL, we're quite unique in that we are sort of property focused. So for us, that was the easy bit, putting together the technical spec. I think what we perhaps struggled with was the vibe piece, because it's, the technical piece we're familiar with. But, one of the conversations that once the team were on board and we were in that design phase, we kept on talking about was, what's our wow moment going to be? Or what does that wow moment look like? And I think for some, I see some businesses that are more creative and naturally, their wow comes across, whether it's hospitality, whether it's, visually or sort of digitally, artwork-wise. But for us, we had to sort of find out, okay, actually technically, we know what we want the building to do and how it needs to perform. That was very easy to sort of black and white, put down on paper, sort of metrics that we wanted to hit. But trying to define what does a wow moment mean for us as a company and for our clients that are coming to visit was a completely different discussion. You're balancing up, you don't want to seem too extravagant, and have clients thinking, God, what am I paying for? But likewise, you want to create a great client experience, and how do you do that within the design that feels right and authentic to you as a business? And I think that's always very hard for us to sort of put in paper what we wanted that to be. And I would argue it fundamentally also comes back to the basics, because you could have the most amazing wow moment, whether it's huge tech, sort of huge design, but if the acoustics don't work and if the day-to-day doesn't work, then that completely undermines all that sort of wow effort that you've put in.
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of asked the question to some of our clients at at kind of leadership visioning kind of level, so really early on in the process. If a new visitor or a new employee that you were looking to attract came to your office, what would you want them to go and tell their partner over dinner? It kind of gets people thinking in a different way. I think that's about perception of where you are in the marketplace. It was really nice, but geez, that reception desk was £50,000 or whatever that may be, or it was all great, but it was a really shame that didn't work, or that person was a bit rude, or whatever it may be. And sometimes, unfortunately, the thing that can be remembered is the thing that you don't want them to remember, because it just doesn't work as well as it should do.
Yeah, the friction.
Absolutely.
So, question for you then, Roxana. When you're presented with a brief and it says, design me a wow office, how do you go about designing for that?
The WOW office, I think the first point is to know who's your client, who's the end user, what are the expectation of the space. So the lighting for a tech office company that does tech is very different from a design for an, I don't know, architectural space or a graphic design company. So you need to know who's using it and who's going to step into that space. So the lighting is the key element of that mood, that feeling welcomed to the space. So what we do is to get to know the people, even though we need to know, for example, if it's a law firm that are going to use that space, are they going to have neurodivergent people working there? It's good to know all the details. Every little detail that we know would help us to create a space or dedicate a space for those sort of people. So the wow factor is, I think, lighting itself is a wow factor of a building. If you go to a gloomy, dark space that you're not welcomed, it gives you another feeling. But if you go to a space that makes you warm, welcomed, and gives you sort of relaxed mode, then that's different. So with a little detail, you can make that huge difference. A selling point for the building that we're making, and I think acoustic is the same, isn't it?
Yeah, for acoustic it's probably a bit more different in the way that when you go to an office you can see what you see is what you feel, the lights and all that, but the sound probably you don't pay attention to that until something goes wrong, like you have a noise of ventilation, it's too loud. Suddenly you think about it. It's like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable here. I cannot hear what Victor says because it's too loud here. So for acoustic is we prevent those wrong things to go or to happen more than creating the sound. Generally is the interior designer who decides the type of panels that goes there, and we we sort of calculate and tell them, well, actually the environment is going to be good to understand when people speak. I don't know, maybe people with some hearing problems, we can check that your design works for that type of space. There are also many other things related with the user of the office more than the client of the client of our client going to their offices. Is the good sound between meeting rooms, for example. You're in a meeting room and you can hear what they say on the other meeting room next to you. And if you feel that, then you feel it's not a good place.
So how do you communicate that in the design? Because as acousticians, you talk about dB and
yes,
RT and things. How do you humanise that?
Yeah, and from the very first stages of the design, when we talk about acoustics with the client and to understand what they want and the feeling they want to have, it's talking about a normal conversation between two people that don't know anything about acoustics. So when you talk about sound, it's like, well, I want this to be, I don't know, to be lively and as if you were in a coffee shop with a lot of people, but at the same time a bit. So you're trying to use those terms of that everybody understand, and then it's for us to translate that into numbers and figures. And then when we need to talk to our clients about what this 70 dB figure means or what this other absorption of acoustics means, we have to translate to our client into words like, it's going to be lively, it's going to be very, very intimate there, or it's going to sound fantastic like if you go to the cinema. It's going to sound like that.
Are there ways of demonstrating that as well?
And sometimes we build it like mock-up rooms, and we put things as we think they're gonna be in the future, so they can sense that. Other ways is through simulations. We can simulate, do 3D modeling, and you can hear it. Really impressive software nowadays, and with 3D sound and all that. So that's some sort of things that we can do as well. And generally, the clients are really happy with that. That really gives them a sense of what they're going to feel.
I think though there's nothing like taking clients to spaces that you've done. And you say, okay, this is 43 dB and that panel is 50 NRC, or you know, whatever it may be. It's so, I mean, that's why you guys are here, right? Because it's what you do. But it's so easy to get that wrong. And then at the end of that, you know, your defects period or whatever, you know, CEO meeting room, whatever that may be, go, well, that's not what I meant. So I think there's nothing like, you know, talk about that human experience. There's nothing like saying, we're going to take to 3 different spaces and we're going to put you in rooms, we're going to put background, you know, noise on, and experience what that means. You know, what's the value of double glazing, slab to slab, acoustic panels, all that kind of stuff. It's difficult to quantify that unless you're an educated client. So I think go and experience it.
I think one of the things that we like to do also is benchmark.
Yeah.
And so going into a client's existing office is testing it. But along with the objective, we also say to them, give them a questionnaire saying, right, which spaces do you like acoustically? What's your go-to place for a meeting? Where would you avoid for a meeting? And then testing that and then putting that into numbers and saying, okay, well, so that room that you hate, it's got reverberation time of 1 second and it's only got 30 dB sound reduction between that and next door. So we're not going to design to that. We're going to design to your best room. And putting things into sound is something that those who are fortunate enough to be able to hear okay can experience. And we all live in a world which is full of sound. So I think if we communicate in a way that is relatable, then we're doing our job. Too many times, so I'm kind of breaking out of chair mode and into acoustics mode. Apologies for that. But too many times we hear people say, oh, acoustics, it's a dark art. And that's rubbish. If acoustics is coming across as a dark art, then we as acousticians have failed because we're not putting it across in a satisfactory way. So that's a bit of a bugbear. Sorry, anyway.
I think it's the same for lighting.
Yeah.
You know, you notice the bad lighting, but you never notice a good lighting. So if lighting works well, you just pass and you feel comfortable. But if it's flickering, if it's too cold, if it's too warm, then you would notice it. So I think we have the share.
Our brains are very clever, aren't they? And they notice when something isn't right. They'll also notice when, say, the sound environment doesn't match with the visual environment or the light or the temperature. It's got to be that sort of multisensorial design. Otherwise, again, we've failed.
Absolutely. So at our own office in top of Tootley Street, we, myself and some of the studio, we put in a series of focus rooms rather than pods. It's not, you know, it's 4,500 square feet, so it's not huge. And we were criticised because the focus spaces, the lighting was too dim and too intimate. And I said, but that's the whole point. The whole point is you're in this space to focus, to maybe on a Teams call, to read a report, to make a phone call. It should feel completely different to what's out there. Now there's a level of control so it can come up. But on the flip side, as you mentioned, Andy, about when it doesn't work, if you ever go into a focus room and there's a spotlight that's from above and you're in a Teams call, it's not complimentary at all. So it's, you know, lighting is a real consideration.
So, I mean, just on that, Roxana, then, so lighting for every meeting now is hybrid. There's very few meetings I've been in where it's only the people in the room. So we've always got hybrid. How do you light for effective video conferencing and so you can get facial expressions right? Because we need to be able to see people's facial expressions. We need to be able to read people's or see people's lips moving. What are the tips for that?
Usually what we do is just having a cylindrical illumination on the face. We calculate it, we measure it, we make sure it's right, but at the same time we have to consider the glare. So we don't want, you know, a floodlight into your face that yes, people can see you. It's like being at a stage performing with all the spotlights. So the actors, they usually get used to it. But in a video conference, you spend most of your time in front of the computer talking to people and with a floodlight into your face, you're going to get headaches, you're going to get all sorts of problems if that lighting is glary and uncomfortable. So the balance is where, well, our design, our speciality is. So to know where that limit is, how bright it should be, and not brighter than that, because it's going to be uncomfortable. So it's all about calculations, it's all about the design and the mood of the space, like what James mentioned about those focus rooms. Obviously, we get flexibility to people. If they want it to be brighter, then they can do it. If they want it to be dim, they can feel comfortable.
Local control.
Local control, usually the desk lamps that you can adjust. Because I'm a short person, the lighting is different for me than you are.
I'm closer to them than you are.
Yes, you are just so I see all the light sources because I literally walk below everything, but it might not be the same.
I'd bang my head on them. Yeah. So just picking up on, so we talked about getting the brief right, and I guess sort of a question for you, Georgina, or a discussion point. So for One Broadgate, it's 90,000 square foot, it's massive, you can set the brief. How do you, so when you're doing a smaller office of say 2,500 square feet, how do you maintain the rigidity in terms of your expectations will be met, but the flexibility that you will procure it maybe in a different way, and maybe go out to tender at stage 2 rather than stage 4? And how do you ring fence those non-negotiables?
Yeah, so as a client, we've been doing a lot of work internally across our corporate real estate team as to what the standardised experience is across our offices. So whether you're in a 10,000 square foot office in Leeds or you're in London, there are some fundamentals that applies for our people regardless of where you are, and particularly what that work experience feels like and looks like has led a lot of that discussion, which has a sort of wider impact in terms of what we're talking about in terms of lighting and acoustics. So we have a sort of standard sort of scope that we must hit for every project. A lot of that has been based off either sort of WELL or BREEAM, or where we've been targeting certifications. That's given us a lot to sort of go out to different parties regardless of the size of the project, to sort of set that ambition. So I think at this stage we've got a core set of requirements, so across sort of meeting room spec. What is then different is the unique spaces to that office. So that is then coming into what's the client experience, what is the employee experience, do you have a showcase space? So for example, in London, we have a multimedia room that is sort of the acoustics in that room is far above and beyond what we have sort of across the rest of the UK. So then that becomes a specific sort of briefing item in itself. Whereas sort of, within our regional offices, we then might have other parts that differ from the main. But I'd say our sort of core 70% is now a sort of standard work experience expectation, regardless of where you're based throughout the country. So that sort of lays a lot of the groundwork, and then working with different parties to achieve that.
So just following on from that, then the question for you, James, I guess. So if you're developing a scheme up to REBA stage 2, then it's going out to a turnkey D&B contractor, and you're then retained in a design guardian role. How do you navigate the brief versus budget, and how do you ring fence those non-negotiables, and how do you look after the client's best interest?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Whilst not blowing the budget.
And designers sometimes like to do that, right? So I think, as we've already mentioned, I think the priorities at briefing stage and getting everybody to buy into, the priorities and the criteria that are non-negotiable on these particular projects are these. And we kind of set, in the business, we kind of set these sort of priority triangles, if you like, with our clients, and you say, okay, well, the upper third is non-negotiable. The middle bits, if you really get pushed, there might be some flex in those for value engineering, and the ones that are maybe lower down are maybe nice to have, as a for instance. I think once you understand those priorities, as we kind of mentioned, as you mentioned about, an office in London versus an office in Leeds versus, a regional office, whatever. I think as long as you understand the priorities and the criteria for success of that particular project and for that particular company, I think then you can flex with that a little bit. But I think that design have a responsibility to understand some commerciality on projects. It's a wonderful thing to encourage clients to dream big. I mean, we kind of wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't go on this kind of creative process with them. But there are parameters that you need to educate clients along that way. But again, for me, it would boil down to the priorities that you set at brief stage that are absolute must-haves. You don't touch those, and are they, to your point, are they something from a performance and experience point of view that actually they roll out across all the different workspaces, and in turn, does that allow those workspaces to interact with each other? Digital performance as acoustics, lighting, as a for instance. So for me, I think it's about, as I mentioned, brief taking, making sure you've got the right people in the room, making sure everybody understands what those priorities are, and design having a responsibility to have some commercial nous to it. And with value engineering, it's a word that all designers hate, but it happens, and we can't really get away from that. I think it's just about being sensible with it. If you've designed a space that hasn't been priced, or budget, the design has evolved so much, you need to manage the client and their expectations on that journey. But if you get to a point and you simply can't afford it, then I think there's some responsibility that team has around that. But also then you then go into the value engineering. But it doesn't mean that things just disappear. You can be quite clever with it, actually. We do quite a lot of kind of detail and build stage 2 kind of type work. And actually you can, sometimes it's about being sensible and pragmatic with spec level. But again, there'll be certain things that you wouldn't touch those.
I would just add to that one sort of thing that we've found really useful to get to the point where we've got that brief in a really good spot for the core items, and also on the cost front has been lessons learned at the end of every project. And I appreciate often people head off onto the next thing as soon as a project is done, or do a very initial lessons learned, but actually we were fortunate to have a run of smaller projects before getting to our larger London project. And after sort of, a good 4, 5, 6 months of occupation, sitting down with the whole sort of design and build team, key stakeholders, and going through lessons learned both throughout the design phase and then also in operation. And so where we were finding issues with acoustics of either a certain product type, well, then very quickly we knew, okay, next one we're not going to make that mistake again, lock that into the requirements. Or if we were finding sort of more cost-effective solutions on some projects, great, let's lock that in for the next. And I think it can sometimes be a tricky conversation to look back at, where things didn't quite land where you wanted them to. But I've found that the most useful sort of feedback loop of, okay, yeah, this is really working. This we wouldn't do again.
We need to be bold enough to admit failure, don't we, really? Or that we got it wrong.
Yeah.
And
I think partnership...
Don't admit that to the lawyers. That's different.
I think true partnership as well is something that, we don't necessarily talk too much about. It's you're a client, you're a designer, you're a contractor, but actually if it's a real partnership that you want, and you want that team of people to go on a journey across multiple sites with you, whether that be UK, throughout Europe, whatever. I think honest feedback and true collaboration is a great thing. I think all parties welcome that. I think that's absolutely the right way to go. And as
you
you
often
mentioned,
find a solution on the next project. Of course, that one issue you complained about in a previous project, you found a solution on the next, and there's then sort of cross-pollination across fit out.
And it just evolves. And I think sometimes that feedback can be both ways as well. You might find a contractor that might say, you guys really squeezed us on program, and at the end of that you're saying, well, that's not quite good enough quality, but look what you made us do. So I actually think the feedback is all parties genuinely getting around the table and saying, how do we make these projects continue to find more success on those projects? And then you better them every stage, as you go through.
I think one thing that is usually missing from that feedback part is we always get the negative feedback. When something goes wrong, we have a logbook of we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that. But we never get the positive feedback. Say, oh, this place worked well. So we can use that experience everywhere. So that conversation with the end user, with the client, is very important as lessons learned.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I'm going to mention the C word that we haven't mentioned. Well, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, and that's carbon. Because we're all low-carbon designers, we're low-carbon companies, we're low-carbon occupiers. I just want to ask each of the panel what's your biggest thing that you can influence or that you can control that can have the biggest benefit in terms of operational and embodied carbon. I'll start
Should
with
I
you,
start?
Roxana.
The first thing that comes to my mind is Cat A. So I always use that experience that you'd never go to a supermarket to buy things that you know that you're going to put in the bin. So if you're going to if you're going to buy it, then use it cleverly. Use something, buy something that you can use throughout the space. So that's the main thing. And then sometimes the less is more. You don't have to illuminate to the maximum. Our eyes are adaptive, and the British standards is a guideline. So you can go around it, work with the client to find a fine tuning.
What about you, Victor?
Well, I guess for acoustic it's more about materials. So the amount of material and the type of material, nothing really operational. So it's better to use this material that is more organic, more than this one that is made out of plastic or made out of cement. And also the quantity of material is very easy to over-engineer with acoustics. I just put panels throughout the whole ceiling here. It's going to sound brilliant. And yeah, it's going to sound brilliant, but probably it's going to sound probably the same for everybody with half of that material. So we now introduce in our calculations this factor. Like let's try to make more or less similar impacts with probably half of the material. And instead of thinking about cement or 3 layers of board for a wall, we just think about one board but a bit wider gap between the boards. We give the same performance with less material, so we factor that in now. So that's what we think about.
Okay. And what about as a occupier? How do you control carbon?
I'll answer in sort of 2 parts because facing into both. So in terms of operational carbon and operating the office, I think the real opportunity is a lot around out of hours controls and small adjustments that actually your people won't notice but will have a huge impact over time. So from a lighting level, we were talking about 500 lux. Actually, if you've designed an office well, you're utilising natural light, you've sort of considered the space, you could quite happily function at 300 lux, which scale that up, over a 10, 15-year lease with energy costs at the moment, that is a huge saving. Or sort of one thing that we've lent into at the moment is power that is feeding monitors every day of the year. We know the business shuts down over Christmas. We know that no one's in on a weekend late at night. Why are we still sort of paying for a tiny feed, but a feed of energy all the same to go to those monitors? So installing things like out of hours power controls so that shuts down, out of hours, ready to go again in the morning. And again, as soon as you scale up both the carbon impact and cost impact of that, that's a huge saving on both sides. From the embodied carbon side of design, I sort of get what's been said in terms of really consciously using less but better materials has been a key theme for us. And then the second piece of that, which I think is the real sort of opportunity area, is circular procurement and leaning into circularity. we've learned a lot trying to do that on our project over the past couple of years. It's a fast-moving area. There's still a lot of work to do to get us to a place where people are using more circular materials, but there are definitely partners out there who want to be doing that, and not just from a furniture point of view. I think typically people have started to get more comfortable with reused furniture, buying second life furniture, but actually I'm talking about some of the acoustic panels we've got in the office were in a bank previously. They only needed them temporarily. They were still in great condition. No one notices an acoustic, well, some people notice an acoustic panel, but as an employee day to day, you know, it's doing its job, you know, and the carbon saving, again, as soon as you scale that up, you know, people are very comfortable with reusing raised access flooring. Great, huge carbon saving there, but what about all the glazing we're putting in across all of these offices? Can we reuse that? So that's where I'd really sort of encourage people to sort of open their mind as to what can be achieved, because that can be huge in terms of carbon.
Do you think there's a link between sort of the vintage is huge, and it's cool to wear someone else's clothes as long as they finish with him, and you got permission. But do you think that's permeating into the office design as well, James?
Definitely, and again, the point I made earlier, I think we have a responsibility to do that. If you've got a client that's educated like you guys are, it's just, you know, it's part of what you want to try and achieve. But if you haven't, then I think we should, you know, we need to educate clients to say, actually, not all of this needs to be brand new and shiny and new. You know, how many carpet tiles get stripped out of places? They're nowhere near the end of their life. And there's platforms and associations like Material Index, as a for instance, that, you know, you can go and, you know, they will take, you know, most carpet manufacturers, as a for instance, will do a take back scheme for free. You know, Material Index will put them in there. You can go and bid on those, you know, etc. Particularly for, I don't know, spaces like a Cat A+. So a short-term lease, actually, that is perfect for those type of environments. So definitely lots of encouragement for, as you mentioned, being circular, reuse, and I think getting rid of the myth of, and Vinted is helping massively, but I think getting rid of the myth of second-hand doesn't mean it's just a bit crap. Second-hand actually means, no, it's got another 5, 6, 7 years worth of life within it. And it can also make cost savings as well to a client. So I agree with everything the panel said. I think the reuse, and the only thing I would add to that is then back to the point we've all talked about, which is expectations really early, understanding a design process and walking a client through that design process so that they really understand what their space is going to look, feel, and perform like. What that then means is it discourages change. Because obviously, you know, change while you're on site generates waste. So again, that would also be something I'd probably add to the panel.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for all your contributions. Good chat. Can we open up to the floor for any questions? I think there's we have a roving mic. If anyone has any questions to the panel. Oh, that was an easy one.
Hi, hello guys. Thank you. I think it was very good. I think my point was, James just said at the end, for me is about educating the client and also understand how we can all the different disciplines work together to make sure that at the end we manage what we try to do. Because there is a lot of, when you started a project, it's not everyone involved, especially where we are now with the environmental sustainability input, which we all should be responsible for that. Doesn't matter what we do, but from the beginning to the end, from the initial brief, which we, who is responsible from the beginning, try to encourage and the client to make sure that everybody else is involved. And what Roxana said as well is also important, but the feedback is good. But as I always say, we don't book an appointment to the doctors just to say, hello, doctor, I am very well. Everything that you've done is working for me. As long as we wish to get feedbacks, we don't do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yes. At the back. Oh, halfway back.
Hi there. great, fascinating talk, and it's more of a kind of comment and reflection, really. With my business being health and wellbeing, just really nice to hear everyone talking about the human senses and how important they are in the process. And then on top of that, I was just kind of wondering whether you, I used to be a recruiter, I still do a little bit, but so when you're in recruitment, you're looking at, I remember my boss saying to me, get out, meet your clients, and just take them out for dinner and get to know them. Because then when they've had a few drinks, they'll tell you everything that they don't tell you. So I was wondering if you guys had and you don't have to reveal what it is, but if you kind of have a process at the beginning to kind of loosen your clients up so that they can tell you the stuff that you really need to know. I don't mean kind of dirty secrets, but more stuff that will help with the design to kind of go, oh, if we'd have known that at the beginning, then we wouldn't have to make all these changes last minute, that will blah, blah, blah. Just wondered if you have any techniques or whether that's almost part of your business plan of like, okay, we're now at the stage now where we need to loosen them up. And just love your thoughts on that.
I think from a design point of view, it's a fundamental part of what we need to do. I think, we've all talked about really understanding the brief. I think one of the challenges is making sure you get in front of the right people that are the voice of the business, whether that's a selected team, whether that's a C-suite, whether that's stakeholders, whatever that may be. We've all been in those kind of meetings and you've been steered down a different path, and then you meet somebody else, you go, no, that's not what we want. We want, So making sure you get in front of the right people, I think, is really important. And then I think as a whether you've got a workplace consultancy or a educate design team or whatever, our job is to kind of not just take a brief and go, okay, that's what you want, we'll just go and do that. Our job is to probe and ask questions, and we've got lots of documents that allow us to kind of do that. And I think there's nothing, exactly as you mentioned, there's nothing worse at the end of a project, so a client saying to you, I really wish we'd have thought about that. That's our job, is to get that information out of them somehow, a few drinks, whatever, I don't know. But that's just part of what we need to do.
Yeah, I think, as you said, part of our job is to think of, we have the experience of what can happen, and maybe the client never thought about it. They think about many things, of what they want to feel, or what they want to see, but maybe they didn't think about specific things that we as consultants, we have experience that it will happen. So you can have the very beginning of the stage one, you have conversations with the client, see what they want, and you sort of ask normal questions like a normal conversation, and you gather that information, and they realize about it. And, I didn't think about it. Actually, now that you mentioned that, this is happening in our current office, and can we do something about it? So, okay, we think about it, you put it on your list. So it's part of our job to bring that from them and ask those questions. Yeah.
I think another good way to get people to open up in the context of an office fit out is, going out to see other offices that may be actually very different from your business, but just sparking ideas and as a client team going around and thinking, oh, we really like that, could we do a version of that for us? Or the opposite of, oh, we hated that, could we, and I think that then tells your design team, okay, they're picking up on these bits, but that, I think that's a natural way of feeding back what your client does and doesn't comment on. If they're not commenting on one area, then I'd argue they're not really thinking about that area of design, and that might be an area you need to educate them on. And you kind of can see people's personalities a bit by what they do respond to. So
I think
I have a good example for you that we as lighting designers, we always think about circular, natural cycle of the body, daylighting, etc., etc. And we were presenting to one of the clients, we were talking about it. It was a very casual talk, and we said, okay, this is what we're trying to do, circadian lighting that helps the body. And he said, no, stop. This is a 24 office building, and I don't want my staff to fall asleep during the night when they're working. So make them awake. I don't want that lighting to be, in a sleep mode. I don't care about it. It's harsh, but that's the reality of their business. So we need to deliver that to make their business working. So that casual talking is really helpful.
Was it a casino by any chance? They generally have this light 24 hours, so you don't know if it's...
You don't know what time it is.
Yes, no daylighting.
So I think we've come a long way. You mentioned about designing for health and well-being, and we're doing that really well now. When you look back at maybe in the 1990s, I think we'd lost the plot, and we were designing buildings and then just putting people in them. Whereas, and the early days of BREEAM and SCAR and things, it was about building performance, which you could have a BREEAM excellent or BREEAM outstanding building that was useless in terms of its occupants. And I think WELL has probably helped. So now we're designing buildings inside out, which is the right way. Buildings only exist for the people in them. Otherwise, they're pointless. And so I guess sort of wrapping up everything that we've been talking about, it's about getting to know your client, understanding what their pain points are, understanding what they're passionate about, and understanding what their makeup is in terms of what tasks they do, what roles they have, what proportion of neurodiversity they have, and really just designing around that. And that's what makes office design fun. I think office design is quite unique. It's not regulated in the same way as, say, schools or residential, because it is niche. Designing an office for JLL is different to designing an office for a hedge fund or a call centre or for data analysts. And that's what we get out of bed in the morning for, is to do something really cool, which is unique, but building on that collective experience and designing really awesome buildings for awesome people. So I think we're about an hour, so that's pretty much us done. So I just want to thank all our panellists. I want to thank James, Georgina, Victor, Roxana. Thank all you guys for coming. Thank Synergy Creativ and ekko for hosting. And stick around. I think that's the plan. So yeah, thank you.